viewers, and I mentioned a video message. Dear Mr. Alfred de Zayas, the original UN independent expert for the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order, is in another room now in another side event, and he used to come in 20 meters. On my left, here is my lifelong friend, Mr. Leon Carlo CEO, the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Kingdom of the Hawaiian Islands, and he's a long struggle person in the United Nations system. And on my right, it's an honor to introduce him, Mr. Hoshin Nakamura, the representative of the Okinawa independence movement. He is a teacher at the Okinawa Language Center and at Okinawa International School. And I would like to say that we've got a video message from the president of Kabaj, from Peru Tacna, a video presentation on the situation of human rights violations in Bolivia. There is something interesting happened because I would like to tell my gratefulness for the government of Bolivia. There is a violation of human rights situation of a person, a member of an Aymara nation. Jesus Alarcon is living in Bolivia, and he's one of the Aymara nation, and there has been some violations of human rights for another Aymara nation group. But thanks to the Bolivia government that we have got fruitful results, and then we do not want to present the video. Sometimes there can be violations of human rights without the policy of the states, and this is a particular case, and we are grateful to the Bolivia government. And I would like to say, before giving the floor to Mr. Hoshin Nakamura, there has been a good decision last week by the International Court of Justice on the Chagos Archipelago case. It's an exceptional case for the first time in the history of International Court of Justice, not on decolonization or the right of the self-determination, but the International Court of Justice had given one more step than the Mauritius government's lawyers. This is the reason that it's an exceptional case. And on my side, it is not enough. And if we add some words on the decision of International Court of Justice, the decision will become a binding decision for the first time in the history of International Court of Justice, that an advisory opinion will become a binding decision. And I would like to remind that the position of Okinawa people who has got a language of Yuan, that means that they are the First Nations of the Okinawa Island, because it is not the definition of peoples or the nations, but if you have got your own mother language, you are a nation. And I would like to mention the report of Tududian in 2005, which was printed in 24th January 2006, a special reporter on the contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related tolerance. It has given an international example in paragraph 51 of his paragraph that some courts mentioned that the people of Okinawa had special feelings and they were not normal. This is a decision or mentioning of a court decision of Japan. So I give the floor to Mr. Nakamura, and I will pass for the... no, you can sit here, I can pass here. You can give your speech. Or if you want to pass here, Mr. Nakamura? Yeah, okay.
Usurio Chu Ganabira. One Nakamura di Chobi, Uchinakara, Chabita. Yuta school Nigasabira. I greeted you in Okinawa language. I bet no one of you knows, including Japanese. Mr. Goto probably don't know what I said, because this is my mother tongue. I'm going to present today's speech in English. instead of Okinawan language. The title is a human rights, the piece of Okinawa co-region I'm representing. On Monday, I'm going to talk about militarization of Okinawa and the Ryukyu Islands. Today, 3 topics: self-determination for Okinawa. Second, human rights violations in Okinawa, and environmental issue in Okinawa. This is the map of Okinawa between the chain of islands called the Ryukyu Islands, or Ryukyus in short. In parentheses, it says Japan, which means Japan took over this kingdom by military power. Ryukyu Islands consists of 160 islands, of which about 48 islands are populated today. Exist between southern Japan and Taiwan. We have very beautiful beaches. Nearly 10 million people come to our islands as a tourist. I'm going to skip militarization because I'm going to do it on Monday. This doesn't contain. This is only militarization. This is only militarization. I have my own. If I can connect, this is a Monday.
So, this time I give the floor to
Yes,
Mr.
yes, yes.
So, now during his preparation, I give the floor to Mr. Leoncarlo Siu.
Mahalo. Aloha. Aloha ia mai o kou a e maluhia hoi I ke akua. E kou ka kou makua a e ka haku a me ka upani hemulele. I greet all of you. It's my pleasure to be back in Geneva, and good to see familiar faces, and good to see some new faces as well. I have been here for quite a number of years to plead the case of Hawaii and our situation in Hawaii, which is a sovereign state under occupation by the United States. Now, a lot of people view Hawaii as being part of the United States, and they thought we always have been, or we were decolonized at some point, and that we have recently tried to gain independence. Actually, I have here, and I didn't prepare a PowerPoint, but I have here a Diva magazine, the current issue, and it has in here a story, and the story is on the 175th anniversary of our independence. So Hawaii has been a recognized sovereign independent state for 175, going on 176 years right now. So this particular story tells about how Hawaii became recognized as a sovereign state. And this helps to dispel the confusion that people have about the status of our nation. We actually are still a sovereign nation, as we were 175 years ago and commencing forward. The sovereignty of the Hawaiian Kingdom, the independence of the Hawaiian Kingdom was never extinguished, and it was never relinquished. We never gave it up. The United States simply moved in a series of very questionable and illegal acts, took over the Hawaiian Islands 126 years ago. They landed troops in Hawaii. We were a fully sovereign nation with treaties with 46 other states, either bilateral or multilateral treaties. And we were a member of the Universal Postal Union since 1872, and just fully functioning as a country and at peace and in friendship with every country in the world. But the United States suddenly landed troops in the Hawaiian Islands because they wanted to take control of the Hawaiian Islands because of Pearl Harbor, which is what they wanted to use as a naval base, and which they have since, or soon after 1893, they converted it into a naval base and have been operating from there. The Pacific Command operates from that base, and I'll talk more about the militarization next time as well. But anyway, they operate, the largest military command in the world is based at Pearl Harbor in the Hawaiian Islands. So that was their motivation for seizing the Hawaiian Islands. On the other hand, there was a coup d'etat on the inside that was aided by the United States. And the coup d'etat was from sugar planters, those that were making quite a bit of money off sugar, but wanted to get better prices for their sugar and more consistent and steady prices by having Hawaii annexed to the United States. Then it wouldn't be foreign sugar being shipped into the United States, it would be part of the United States, and their sugar prices would be basically assured that they would have good prices. So on the inside of Hawaii, you had these powerful sugar planters and agricultural interests who were wanting to sell sugar to the United States. On the outside, there was the United States Navy. So these were the factors that took place. So so the U.S. Was eager to take control of the islands so they could use Pearl Harbor as a naval base. There were two attempts in the 1890s after the coup d'etat took place. There were two attempts to annex the Hawaiian Islands to the United States. Both attempts failed because they were deemed illegal, that the United States could not annex a foreign country that was still a sovereign territory. And so both attempts at annexing Hawaii to the United States failed. But in 1893, the United States entered into a war with Spain. And most of the territories that were at conflict were the territories in the Caribbean. But there was also territories in the Pacific. There was the Philippines and Guam. And so in this war against Spain, the Hawaiian Islands became very important for the U.S. to prosecute their war against Spain in the Philippines. But that was just the start, because once the U.S. won the war against Spain and that war was settled, the Filipinos, who had been fighting a war of liberation against the Spanish, they thought that their country was now liberated, and they thought that the United States had liberated the country. But the United States announced that no, this is now a colony of the United States. The Philippines are now the colony of the United States. And when they announced that, the Filipinos resumed their war of liberation, but this time against the United States and not against Spain. So a very, very bloody and protracted war took place, about 4 years of fighting. And in that, anywhere between 200,000 and 1 million Filipinos died. And there were roughly 5,000 U.S. troops that died in that war. This is one of the best held secrets. Very few people actually talk about this American-Filipino war. But that war and the war against Spain masked the United States takeover of Hawaii. In other words, they had used Hawaii as a military base to fight the war in the Philippines. And then after the war was settled, after the Spanish-American War was settled, the U.S. simply didn't leave. They kept the military bases there and basically announced to everybody that Hawaii had been successfully annexed to the United States. The interesting thing was that none of our treaty countries, the 46 other nations with whom we had treaties, none of them actually objected. One of them, Japan, spoke up, but only because they wanted fair treatment for their citizens who were living in the Hawaiian Islands, but not because they objected to the United States takeover. So what happened in Hawaii actually set a pattern or not a procedure, but it set a practice by the United States, and that is of military intervention and in foreign countries. And so there was a book written in 2006 by a gentleman named Stephen Kinzer, who was a foreign reporter for the New York Times for many years. And he wrote a book, and it was called Overthrow, and it said, American Imperialism from Hawaii to Iraq. And in it, what he was saying was the Hawaii incident of the U.S. taking over Hawaii was a violation of international law, but it also set the pattern for how the United States responded in many, many other cases, dozens of other cases in Central America and South America, in the United States' efforts to destabilize a country and then either prosecute a war or just create so much havoc that the nation becomes sort of a vassal to the United States. We see that now happening right now in Venezuela. And so many of our of the incidents of the United States interfering in the affairs of foreign countries occurred because of what had happened originally in the Hawaiian Kingdom. Anyway, so Hawaii is still very much, or what happened in the Hawaiian Kingdom is still very much a part of what's going on in the world today in the behavior of the United States. And today, the topic of we're talking about today has to do with self-determination. And if you read our flyer, you'll see that it's talking about how self-determination or the appearance of self-determination can often be used as a weapon against those people who are trying to gain independence or to be freed from some kind of occupation. And so that's happened in the Hawaiian Islands. So the United States never acquired the Hawaiian Islands. But in 1946, when the United Nations was formed, and a process for decolonization was considered, the Hawaiian Islands were submitted along with Alaska, Puerto Rico, Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa. All these American holdings, or territories they call them, were submitted for decolonization in 1946. But in 1959, expecting that more strict, how would you say, procedures were to be adopted in 1960 by the General Assembly concerning decolonization. So in 1959, the U.S. decided to remove Hawaii and Alaska from that list. And by doing so, what they did was they created a fake self-determination procedure in which they said that they conducted plebiscites or referenda in both our countries, in Alaska and in Hawaii, and in doing so, they violated many, many different types of rules in conducting a plebiscite or in conducting any form of a free, prior, and informed consent situation. So, but they conducted these fake plebiscites, and then they reported in 1959 to the General Assembly of the United Nations that Hawaii and Alaska had both decided to become incorporated or to become integrated into the United States as states of the United States. And this was a false report. However, it was not confirmed or questioned by the United Nations. The United Nations passed a resolution that accepted the report at face value, and then considered, or basically they said that the United States was no longer required because they had fulfilled the obligation of 73E of the United Nations Charter, and so therefore they, or Article 73E, and they basically decided that Hawaii was part of the United States and Alaska was part of the United States, And that's how it was left since then. We know that Hawaii and Alaska are not part of the United States, and Hawaii in particular, because we are still a sovereign country. And we're celebrating 176th anniversary this year of being a sovereign country. So therefore, in our case, and as you will find out in the case of Okinawa also, the right to self-determination has been actually manipulated to the point where it actually denies the people the right to self-determination. So thank you very much for listening, and that brings us over.
Many thanks and welcome, Mr. Alfred de Zayas.
Thank you.
But I will give the
Of
floor
course,
now
of course.
to Hoshin Nakamura to finish his speech. And here you are.
Thank you. I'm going to continue. The power to self-determination for Okinawa has been taken away by 3 foreign invasions. First wave was the Japanese invasion in 1609. 3,000 trained samurai soldiers attacked peaceful Ryukyuan kingdom. King and his ministers were kidnapped to Japan. They were forced to sign an unfair, unequal 15-article ordinance Satsuma made. One of the ministers, Jana, resigned. He refused to sign this ordinance, and he was illegally beheaded by Satsuma samurai. This is a drawing of Satsuma invasion to Ryukyu Kingdom in 1609. And Shuri Castle was attacked on April 1st, 1609 by Satsuma soldiers. Satsuma imposed 15 unfair, unequal 15 article or ordinance. I don't read all of them. I'll give you maybe 3 of them. Number 1, all tribute and trade are under Satsuma's control. In other words, the Ryukyu Kingdom became a puppet nation of invader of Japan. Article 3 says no stipends or property or salary should be paid to women. So women are like slaves. Number 8, taxes must be paid according to the Satsuma's rule. So Satsuma invader will decide how much tax should be paid to Ryukyuan people. So Ryukyuan people suffered from being enslaved by Japanese Satsuma colonists for 270 long years. The second wave of invasion was 1879. Against the will of King Shotai and his high government officials, Japanese government officials brought about 600 soldiers and police forces to hijack Ryukyu Kingdom. The independence of Ryukyu Kingdom has been stolen by Japan in March 1879. Now the Ryukyuan people had to be Japanized by means of political, economic, educational, language, religious assimilation programs enforced upon the Ryukyuan peoples. Japanese brainwashed, hypnotized, and mind controlled our people day in and day out. As a result, the Ryukyuans have been suffering from BHM syndrome, I call it. So this is a picture, a photo of 1879 Japanese invasion hijacked Ryukyu Kingdom. They kidnapped the king and his government officials and quickly built a prefecture government of Japan and prison. Whoever opposed against Japanese arrested, imprisoned, tortured, even killed. So Japan's violation of Okinawa's human rights and destruction of democracy. 1, the right to speak our own language has been destroyed by government language assimilation policy. 2, the right to maintain Ryukyu's independence and the right to self-determination has been destroyed. 3, the right to live peacefully without fear has been destroyed by the negative side effects of heavy U.S. military installations in Okinawa after U.S. invasion. 4, the Okinawan people's strong opposition of the new Henoko U.S. military base has been ignored by ongoing base construction of Japan. Japan is destroying a universal democracy in Okinawa. The third wave of invasion by the United States from March 26th to June 23rd, 1945. About 123,000 Okinawan people were killed. They were Aryan people. More Okinawan people died than Japanese and American soldiers combined. So this is the invasion, bombardment to Okinawa. And at least in this island, called Keram Islands, 6 mass suicides took place because of Japanese mind control. And I saw this kind of, Okinawan people. I was 5 years old. I'm a survivor of this war, Battle of Okinawa. So every day I saw dead bodies of my people like this. Children, old people. Even teenage girls and boys were drafted by Japanese. This is against the international law, human rights violation. So this high school girl was sent to battlefront by Japanese. So 194 girls, 952 boys, total 1,146 boys and girls were killed in the Battle of Okinawa. The U.S. destroyed Okinawan human rights. Kamejiro Sanaga was democratically elected as the first post-war mayor of Naha City, but the U.S. authorities cut the water and electric supplies and illegally ousted the mayor Sanaga from his office in 1975. Democratically elected governor was ousted. So he is Kamejiro Sanaga coming out from prison. Even today, this is only recent, 2016, July 22nd. Okinawan people demonstrating against the new U.S. military base construction. Peacefully they are sitting, but Japanese sent police forces. I counted 14 Japanese police forces are, arresting one Okinawan man. So this is a picture. Japanese government accused of unjustified legally detention of Okinawan anti-US military activist Hiroji Yamashiro came to here 2017. In U.S. speech, Hiroji Yamashiro called out Japanese government human rights violation in Okinawa. The human rights violation in Okinawa, 1879, against the will of King Shotai and his high government officials, Japanese military police forces hijacked Ryukyang King and kidnapped King and his family, government officials, to Tokyo. 1945, Japanese military officials sent teenage high school boys and girls, as I mentioned, to the battlefront. Human rights violations under the U.S. occupation. The rape and murder of 6-year-old Yumiko Chan by a U.S. soldier in Kadena, September 3, 1955, took place. And number 2, an Okinawan elementary school girl was crushed to death by the fallen trailer in Yomitan village in June 1956. Number 3, on March 7, 1996, 3 American soldiers abducted and raped 12-year-old Okinawan girl walking home from buying a notebook. F-Fighter 100 jet fighter crashed on June 30, 1959. Just about the time the children at the Miyamori Elementary School in Ishikawa City, Okinawa Island, they were preparing to serve milk and lunch. And F-100 US jet fighter suddenly crashed onto the school. 17 people, including 11 children, were killed. 212 people got wounded. So this is a jet fighter that crashed on this elementary school. The dead children are carried away. The wounded boys and girls taken to hospital. This is a trailer crashed upon the 10-year-old girl. So this suspending supplies by helicopter is practiced frequently over the residential areas in Okinawa, even today. Helicopter crashed upon the International University 2004. The rape and murder by an ex-US GI. In April 2016, the US military ex-Marine Franklin to age 32, raped, murdered, and abandoned 20-year-old office worker, Miss Rina Shimabukuro in Uruma City, Okinawa. So Okinawan people got so angry and protested against this rape incident. Mass riot took place. So this is a list of crimes Americans committed. At least 500 rape cases committed by the U.S. soldiers in Okinawa have been reported between 1945 and 2009, plus 10 years. So this report is only about 1/5 of the total crimes. Many human skeletons of Ryukyuan people are stolen by Japanese as a research purpose. They are kept by Kyoto University. So Okinawa, we are requesting the Kyoto University to return the bones of our people because they need to be properly buried, mourned, respected, and prayed. The kind of Japan's disrespect and discrimination toward the Ryukyuan peoples violates Article 12 of the UNDRIP. Families of the descendants are strongly demanding this return of the bones. Now, environmental issue in Okinawa: soil and water pollution, noise pollution, roar of the jet airplanes. The drum cans with seal from the dead leaves agent manufacturing company were unearthed from the soccer field of Okinawa City in 2013. These drum cans investigated, reported by IPP, the Informed Public Project Reporter. Okay, Agent Orange, herbicide. So they are very poisonous. This is very poisonous. In Vietnam today, deformed babies are born like this. This mother is bathing deformed child whose father was exposed to dioxin during the Vietnam War. So many deformed babies are born because of this. Called Agent Orange. So please watch this documentary, Agent Orange in Okinawa, YouTube. Soil contamination caused by the US military coming from bases. So, polluting spring water and water used for farming. The polluted toxic groundwater is constantly polluting the water and farmland. Burning well also took place near Kadena Air Base. So this is Kadena Air Base. You can see the military planes and village farming, growing vegetables. 83% of this Kadena town is taken away by America as a military base. People live in only 17% area. So this is the Kadena Air Base, which was used to bomb Korea, Vietnam, and other parts of Asia. So noise pollution is also another problem. Professor of Environmental Health of Hokkaido University, Toshihiko Matsui, speaks wrote after investigation. About 4 people are dying of heart attacks and strokes per year due to nighttime noise, and other people suffer. So this is psychosomatic illnesses being caused by noise pollution. Department of Agriculture and Environmental Affairs, Okinawa Prefectural Government summarized side effects. First, sleep disorders. Second, preschool children's abnormal behaviors. 3, effects on long-term memory. 4, higher rate of low birth weight infant, hearing loss, and so on. Summary. 1. In 1879, Japan hijacked Ryukyu Kingdom and stolen its independence and the right to practice self-determination. 2. 1945, the U.S. military forces confiscated vast spaces of land, sea, and air that have been severely suppressing the people's right, freedom, and democracy in Okinawa for past 74 years. 3. Yukon people have 100% right to become free from both Japan and the United States control and to restore its independence. In 2013, the Association of Comprehensive Studies for Independence of the Ryukyuan Peoples was established to achieve Ryukyu's independence. It's called, association is called AXIOS. 4. When the rulers habitually practice their unfair and abnormal behavior to the suppressed, they soon come to feel themselves as if it were fair and normal. The suppressed must raise their voice outward for justice and for the restoration of normalization of human rights. That's why I'm here today. So, my dear precious friends, please help us, the suppressed Ryukyuans, to become free and independent in the near future. Thank you. Let's work together for world peace and sustain the healthy environment. Thank you.
Dear Mr. Hoshin Nakamura, many thanks for your so effective speech and information. Before giving to the floor Mr. Alfred de Zayas, I would like to add that for the first time we are detailedly informed about the Ryukyuan's problem and Ryukyuan's islands and their past, today, and what we could do for their future. And I would like to give to the floor to the Mr. Alfred de Zayas. He is my teacher with his books and articles. Here it is.
Thank you so much, and pleasure to be with you today. Now, I am particularly appreciative of what we have just heard from Mr. Nakamura. These are things that are not well known in the world. There's been very little in the mainstream press about these issues, and they are hugely important. As you may know, back in 2013, I presented a report to the General Assembly in which I focused on the right of self-determination and its application to all peoples. And I specifically, in my recommendations to the General Assembly, requested that all communications concerning people aspiring to self-determination should be forwarded to the so-called Committee of 24 of the General Assembly and be dealt with in the procedure provided for under Article 73 of the UN Charter. I specifically mentioned the cases of Alaska, the cases of Hawaii, the cases of Kashmir, the cases of the Tamils in Sri Lanka, and so on and so forth. But of course, this paragraph 69N of the report of 2013 said, and others. It was not just limited to those. As you know, the list of so-called non-self-governing territories is very incomplete. It's like only 17 peoples are aspiring to self-determination. It is really ridiculous. One of the points I made already in 2013 is that the realization of the right of self-determination, which you all know it's anchored in Article 1 of the UN Charter, in Article 1 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. The realization of this right is an effective conflict prevention strategy. So if you want to keep local, regional, and international peace, you'd better make sure that you have a mechanism that allows for timely negotiation to prevent conflict. And if you don't do that, it's the denial of the right of self-determination that has led to hundreds of wars since 1945. Now, in some cases, the wars have been successful. You have Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kosovo emerging as independent entities, but the Biafran people, the Igbos of Biafra in Nigeria, were massacred. The war from 1967 to 1970 cost approximately 3 million human lives, and at the end of the day, they did not get self-determination because the curse of oil, because Biafra is an oil-rich region of Nigeria, and of course the central government in Nigeria wanted to control those natural resources and did not want to let the people of Biafra have any part of it. And so the central government and Shell, Royal Shell, actually destroyed the environment of Biafra and did not even bother to share the wealth with the Igbos of this province. By the way, the persecution of the Igbos is not finished, because they still want self-determination, and there's still murders of Igbo leaders, including Ken Saro-Wiwa some years ago. So this is not a closed chapter. We're going to hear more about self-determination in Nigeria. You have a huge problem of self-determination in Cameroon. As you know, the Cameroon, well, most of Africa is a checkerboard since it was cut arbitrarily by the colonial powers without any consideration of the ethnic, religious, linguistic identities of these people. And so people were thrown together that didn't belong together, and people were separated so that they had their brothers and sisters across the border, and that was, you know, a French Cameroon, and the other ones are in the English Cameroon. Well, the English Cameroonians went out, and they've been trying to get self-determination and want to separate from the rest of French-speaking Cameroon. That has led to considerable number of deaths, that has led to a lot of arrests. And we in the Human Rights Committee, I say we because for many years I was secretary of the Human Rights Committee, and I was also the chief of the petitions department, so that all petitions landed on my desk. And as the case may be, there is extensive jurisprudence of the Human Rights Committee concerning the persecution, torture, arbitrary detention of leaders of the independence movement in the English-speaking southern Cameroons. Now, other people, as I said, got it nicely, like the Slovenes, but take the state of Bangladesh. In order to have self-determination, they fought a war. And that war also cost about 3 million human lives. And it was Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, and in the end, it separated. Would it not have been more intelligent to have the United Nations mediate in a timely fashion, organize a referendum in a timely fashion, and solve the problem diplomatically, rather than letting these poor people massacre each other? I mean, I'm thinking of the 3 halfway successful referenda organized by the United Nations, the referendum in Ethiopia, Eritrea, the referendum in Timor-Leste, the referendum in Sudan. But these three referenda were only conducted after hundreds of thousands of people had lost their lives. So, I mean, the United Nations failed these people. The United Nations failed to vindicate the rights already enshrined in Article 1 of the UN Charter and in Article 1 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So, in 2014, the year after my report to the General Assembly, paragraph 69N, which had requested that the Committee of 24 take a look at these cases, I devoted an entire report on self-determination. And in that report, I developed 15 criteria how to access self-determination, how to claim self-determination. And among them, of course, the viability of the state, the 4 criteria of the Montevideo Convention to have territory, to have population, to have government, and to have relations with other nations. The Hawaiian Kingdom had it all. With 90-odd countries had relations. Was an existing state member of the, I think even founding member of the Universal Postal Union, and so on and so forth. And here comes the aggressor, the United States, and in 1893 overthrows the kingdom. Now, in 1993, as you probably know, Bill Clinton and the US Congress adopted a resolution making an apology to the people of Hawaii. But just an apology. No effort whatever to remedy the damage done. No effort to return the lands to the rightful owners, to the traditional owners. No effort to return the natural resources to those who were the owners of those natural resources. So it's kind of a farce. It's like pulling your leg. You know, I'm getting more and more annoyed at gestures that mean nothing. In 2009, President Obama issued an apology to the American indigenous. I mean, as you know, when the Anglo-Americans came to North America on the Mayflower to Massachusetts and created the Puritan Society of Massachusetts, there were approximately 10 million indigenous, the Crees and the Cherokees and the Lakotas and Dakotas and Nakotas and the Pueblos and the Pequots. The Pequots were pretty much exterminated in the Pequot Wars of Narragansett and so on. In any event, of those 10 million indigenous, toward the end of the 19th century, there were 190,000 left. So here you have a classical case of genocide. I mean, a people, a culture has been exterminated, has nearly become extinct. Today, there are an estimate of about 2 million indigenous in America. But they are really the owners of the land. Just look at any map of the United States. The cities, the rivers, the mountains, the lakes. There must be tens of thousands of indigenous names. And what does that tell you? That there were all over the continent. Whether you're talking about Seattle, everybody knows Chief Seattle, that gave the name to the town, or you talk about Potomac, Chief Potomac, or you talk about Illinois, Chicago, Idaho, Ottawa, Toronto, Manhattan, Narragansett, Massachusetts, Mississippi, Missouri. They're all indigenous names. I mean, tens of thousands. And you ask yourself, where are they? Gone with the wind. And there's been no effort to undo the damage. I mean, it's like the Opium Wars in the 19th century against China. We brought alcohol to them so as to destroy them. They were not used to that. So we used alcohol as a weapon against the indigenous. And the Brits used opium as a weapon against China. And the most offensive aspect of it is when the Chinese emperor wanted to reduce, or rather to ban, to extirpate this illegal trade in opium, which had never been in China. This was coming into China in the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s. Britain declared war on China and won the first Opium War and won the second Opium War 20 years later. So you see the level of Machiavellism, the level of cynicism, the hypocrisy that accompanies all of this. That's why I go back to human dignity. What is human dignity? It's your identity. You are a Hawaiian. You have every right to be a Hawaiian. And you are, dear friend, an Azerbaijani. You have every right to be what you are. And be proud of it. Be proud of it. And you're an Okinawan, be proud of it. And what is awful is this effort, and I've seen it in the United States with Hispanics and Chicanos, who are sometimes, ashamed of being what they are. Because you're supposed to be white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. You're supposed to be like, the whites. Well, that is not something that you should strive for. What you should do is, this disappeared now. As the case may be, let's go back to the law. The law is when you hold a referendum, Alaska, Hawaii, who should participate in the referendum? Well, obviously, a self-determination referendum is only and exclusively for the indigenous. You're not going to have in a self-determination referendum voting by the colonizers. Imagine if you had had that in many African states. I mean, if you are the colonizer, you are the guest. And you stay there because you are welcome, or tolerated at least, by the owners of the land. But you're not supposed to steal the land away from them. And that, unfortunately, is what happened in Alaska and in Hawaii. And that is why I strongly support that the General Assembly revisit these totally fraudulent so-called referenda that were held, that were not properly organized, that were not properly monitored. You hear about election monitoring and people who say, well, I don't recognize the election because my election monitors were not invited or were invited and didn't go or whatever. Well, you didn't have that at all in 1958-59. How about saying, look, this was a major breach of international law. This was a fraud committed on the United Nations. Not only a fraud committed on the indigenous of Alaska or on the people of Hawaii. There was a fraud perpetrated on the world. And for that reason, anything that is fraudulent is invalid ab initio, is invalid ex tunc. And that means you have to revisit it, you have to adopt a resolution in the General Assembly, and then see whether, because it's difficult, obviously, to undo all of the damage that has been done, but at least to make sure that the people of Alaska and that the people of Hawaii get their rights. And when I say that, also with regard to the population of Ryukyu and of course Okinawa. But in order to achieve that, you have to have the information. And unfortunately, the mainstream media does not carry it. We try to do what we can here in the United Nations, and it's good that we have panels like this. But if you talk to the average American in New York or in Chicago or in Los Angeles, and you say, Alaska should have a new referendum, they will look at you totally surprised. Or Hawaii should have a new referendum, and they don't realize that, say, the apology of Obama in 2009 and the apology of Bill Clinton in 1993 apply specifically to these situations, and there must be a follow-up to them. And on this note, I leave you in case that there's opportunity for questions still. Thanks.
Yeah. Many thanks, Mr. Alfred de Zayas, and I would like to add something on who has got a right to vote for the French New Caledonia, which is an unknown case.
Yeah.
Will in the future bring the case because 20 years of residency, French government said that they have got a legal to right for the future of the New Caledonian Islands, and they give every economic suspension to make the people living there, taking their retirements, suspension of plane tickets, and so also, and a higher retirement salary to change the demography in a different way.
Now, of course, but changing democracy is, not democracy, changing
rules.
demography.
Demography.
The demographic manipulations are prohibited in Article 49 of the 4th Geneva Convention.
And we are to go on this subject, changing the demography for the French New Caledonia and the validity of the referendum past and the future referendum. West Papua, of course, but First Papua is an exceptional case because we do believe that it is not legally accepted by the General Assembly in the resolutions. It's a modus vivendi situation. I would like to give the floor for any questions because we are out of time. Any questions?
But nobody's kicking us out, so I think we can stay on.
We are hungry. We are hungry. We want to leave.
Yes. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Like this?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for the information I received today. I'm very happy I came to see all of this. And my question is to Mr. Zayas.
Yes.
Yes. Hello, Mr. Zayas. Nice to meet you. I am Sarah from Western Sahara, North Africa. I came to this session to represent the Sahrawi women in youth in Belgium. And you've mentioned many countries that deserve the right to self-determination, and I agree with you. Everyone should have the right to self-determination. That's for all. But I didn't hear you mention Western Sahara, which has been occupied since 1975 by Morocco. I am
do mention it in the
Sahrawi.
reports.
I am Sahrawi, and I have the right to be Sahrawi, and I am very proud to be Sahrawi. And I believe my Sahrawi people believe the right to self-determination, don't you?
When you read my reports, there's 2 reports of 2013 and 2014, you will see that I do mention Western Sahara and the right of the Sahrawis. The list of persons or peoples who have the valid claim to self-determination is long. You can also mention Rapa Nui. You can also mention the Mapuches of Chile and of Argentina. You can mention the Catalans. You can mention the Germans, or rather Austrians, of southern Tyrol. I mean, it's a totally abnormal situation. At the end of the First World War, which was supposed to be for self-determination and all sorts of things, that the Allies decided to give Orlando the gift of 200,000 Austrians and this gorgeous area of Austria in the southern Tyrol. And that has been now 100 years that they have been subjected to Italian rule. But go to Bozen, go to Meran, what are you going to hear on the street? German. At least they have maintained their identity, which is a good thing. But as far as the Sahrawis, you have the sympathy and the support of an enormous number of people. And of course, the international law community is on your side. And the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice justifies what you're saying and what you are demanding. The problem is the intellectual dishonesty of many politicians in Europe, many state delegations here on the third floor, and at least, I mean, I want to highlight one positive development. To it, on the 27th of February 2018, the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg decided that the commercial treaty with Morocco could not apply to the territories and could not affect the interests of the people of Western Sahara, because self-determination was a human right. Self-determination belonged to the three pillars of the European Union, and therefore, pursuant to Article 2 of the Treaty of Lisbon, this commercial treaty would not have any application in Western Sahara. That's very fine and good, but that still doesn't give you the actual enjoyment of your state. You are entitled to a state, not just to live in limbo. And unfortunately, the international community is notorious for a lot of rhetoric, a lot of lip service, but not actual implementation, especially if there are economic interests involved. Take Venezuela today. The misfortune of the Venezuelans is that they're supremely rich. They have enormous petroleum resources, gold resources, bauxite resources, and even coltan, which you're holding in your hand. That is the only reason why Trump wants it. He just wants to loot Venezuela. And of course, Morocco wants to continue looting, as it has been doing for decades now. Morocco wants to continue looting the wealth of Western Sahara. So, I mean, it is a tragedy, and you are the people who are suffering it. On the other hand, it is, shall we say, more honor to you that you have not given up, that you have not simply bent and accepted your fate imposed on you by the big powers. I mean, I don't give up hope that sooner rather than later, Western Sahara will be an independent state and that Sahrawis will have their self-determination.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes. Can you introduce yourself, my dear old friends, for the people?
Thank you, Dr. Muhammad. I'm Abu Dhar al-Manna, President of African ECOSOC. I just wonder whether those territories have young people, because our good leaders here are mature enough, but for the movement to be continued, you need to see the young people also taking the role. We do respect and believe in the right of self-determination, as it is one of the most important human rights. and I do respect the work being done by His Excellency Zayas. He's very brave. But we need also to demonstrate the publications and reports and for Alaska and Hawaii and those territories. Just a very small number of people who knows about that. You know, to polarize the issue, to be a support from others. Thank you.
Well, if it is a question of getting the message out, and I think that is the thrust of your contribution, a lot has to be done, and a lot has to be done against all the obstacles and all the monkey wrenches thrown in our way, because the mainstream media suppresses information. It is shocking. I mean, we've been led to believe that we have a free press in the West, but we really do not. We have a press that systematically lies and a press that systematically suppresses information. I mean,